It was rush hour in Lagos, thick with heat and impatience. The sun burned mercilessly above the city, and the streets pulsed with chaos horns blaring in frustration. Street vendors weaving through the dense traffic, shouting offers for cold drinks, plantain chips, and cheap trinkets. At the crowded junction near a high-end supermarket, where tinted SUVs idled beside rusted danfos, a young girl moved between cars, barefoot and coated in dust. Her name was Amira, barely 13. She held a small, wilting bouquet of red roses, tightly as if the petals themselves carried her last hope. The flowers weren't perfect, but they were all she had. She approached a sleek black Range Rover that had rolled to a stop, its glossy surface a mirror to the grime around it. Inside sat Vivian Cole, 45, elegant in gold jewelry and a designer scarf, sipping a latte that cost more than Amira's weekly earnings. Her sunglasses gleamed as she scrolled through her phone. Amira stepped to the window and offered a tentative smile. "Auntie, please 200 for one rose." Vivian looked up slowly, slid her sunglasses down just enough to reveal cold eyes, then let out a laugh, sharp and mocking. "You're dirty. These flowers look like weeds. Go home." The words hit Amira like a slap. Heads turned. Other vendors nearby chuckled at her expense. The girl didn't cry, didn't argue. She simply stood frozen in place, humiliated, her trembling hand still holding out the rose as the traffic light turned green. With a hiss of tires, the Range Rover surged forward, leaving a trail of exhaust and judgment behind. Amira was left in the middle of the road, clutching her crushed bouquet, heart heavy and cheeks burning. But in the car behind Vivian's, a teenage boy sat in the back seat of a modest Toyota, his crisp school uniform a sharp contrast to the heat-blurred world outside. He had seen everything: his mother's voice, her laughter, the girl's silence. And as Amira stepped out of the way, shrinking into the crowd of vendors once more, he kept his eyes on her. Vivian Cole was the kind of woman who lived on the glossy pages of lifestyle magazines, a vision of elegance, power, and poise. As the founder of a luxury skincare brand that had made waves across Nigeria and beyond, she had built her empire from scratch and made sure the world knew it. Her face was a fixture at galas, in interviews, and on billboards, always dressed in pristine white or bold designer prints, always perfect. Divorced for over a decade, she raised her only child, Jason Cole, alone in their palatial mansion, nestled in one of Lagos' most exclusive estates. Vivian wore her wealth like armor, speaking in quotes about excellence, grit, and high standards, while regarding the poor with a thinly veiled disdain. To her, people like Amira, barefoot girls selling flowers on street corners, represented laziness, excuses, and bad choices. But Jason was nothing like her. At 17, he was soft-spoken, observant, and carried a quiet melancholy beneath his polite smile. He moved through his life of privilege, like someone visiting a museum, respectful but never belonging. While his mother networked with politicians and influencers, Jason sat in his room sketching the world she ignored: the Danfo drivers, the fruit sellers, the children playing barefoot in alleyways. He kept notebooks full of poems and portraits, hidden like secrets. He hated how his mother treated people, the dismissiveness, the sharp tongue behind the perfect teeth, and he hated himself more for never having the courage to call it out. Across the city, Amira's life couldn't have been more different. At 13, she was already the pillar of a crumbling world. She lived in a one-room, zinc-roofed flat in a jeganal with her grandmother, Mama Sod, who had raised her since birth. Her mother died in childbirth, and her father disappeared when she was still in diapers. Mama Sod's health had declined in recent years. Her lungs were weak, her back hunched, her body giving out slowly. Amira sold flowers each day, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Every 100 meant another pill, another day of rice, another chance to stay in school. She attended a local community center school when she could, sitting in class with older students and answering questions with a quiet brilliance that startled her teachers. Despite her circumstances, Amira carried herself with a strength that made people stop and look. She never begged. She never asked for pity. She was fiercely intelligent, brave, and loyal, especially to her grandmother. She could recite Yoruba proverbs with perfect timing and knew how to charm just enough to sell a rose, dodge a thief, and make it back home before the rains came. Every day was a fight. Every naira mattered. But she walked with her head held high, bouquet in hand, and eyes that refused to lower, even when they met cruelty to worlds. One of glass and one of grit collided at that intersection, when Vivian Cole rolled up her window in disgust. But her son, Jason, kept watching, and something in Amira's eyes, not the pain, but the pride, refused to leave his mind. Jason couldn't shake the image of the girl with the roses, the way she had stood there, humiliated but unbowed, as laughter echoed and traffic swallowed her up. That moment haunted him like a bruise under his skin. Her face, dusty and fierce, stayed with him long after the Range Rover sped away. The next afternoon, while waiting for his driver outside his elite private school, Jason did something impulsive. He crossed the busy road, ignoring the heat and honking, and walked toward the junction where street vendors gathered. And there she was again, barefoot, her bouquet smaller this time, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was trying not to be seen. He approached slowly, unsure of what to say. Amira turned, instantly guarded, and asked, "Do you want a flower?" Her voice was steady but cautious, already braced for rejection. Jason looked at the roses, then back at her. "Actually," he said, reaching into his wallet, "I want all of them." She blinked in confusion. "All?" He nodded, handing her a crisp note without asking the price. Amira hesitated before taking it, watching him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Okay," she finally said, almost smiling, "but I don't do refunds." That became the beginning. Every day after school, Jason crossed that road. Sometimes he waited. Other times she was already there, waiting too, pretending not to be. He kept buying all her flowers, though he had no use for them. Some days he gave her a sandwich from his lunchbox or a bottled drink. Sometimes they just sat under the shade of a broken billboard and talked. Slowly, Amira began to let her guard down. She told him about Mama Sod and how selling roses wasn't just survival, it was love. How she dreamed of becoming a writer, how she collected words in her head like treasures. One afternoon, she pulled out a crumpled piece of brown paper and read him a poem she had written. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. Jason listened, captivated. For the first time, someone saw her, and for the first time, he felt like he had a reason to be seen. But their quiet rhythm didn't go unnoticed. Vivian Cole, sharp-eyed and suspicious, had begun noticing Jason's growing distance. He no longer lingered in the house after school. His sketches had changed, less of fashion models, more of street vendors and tired faces. One afternoon, curious and irritated, she questioned her driver. He hesitated before saying, "Madame, your son day buy flower from that same small girl, where you insult that day." Vivian's face froze, her fingers tightening around her designer phone. Fury bloomed inside her, not just from the idea of Jason mixing with a street child, but the possibility that she, Vivian Cole, had been defied. Vivian didn't wait long. The moment Jason walked through the front gate, she was already in the foyer, arms crossed, voice sharp. "Why are you embarrassing this family over a roadside beggar? Are you trying to ruin everything I've built?" Jason froze, the words landing like stones. "She's not a beggar," he said, his voice trembling with fury. She has more dignity than half the women you invite to those fake luncheons with their plastic smiles and designer lies. The slap came quick and hot, silencing the hallway. Jason's face turned, but his eyes didn't drop. Without another word, he stormed out, packed a small bag, and spent the next 2 nights on a mattress at his friend Toby's house, barely speaking, barely sleeping. Meanwhile, Vivian, seething and determined to reassert control, made a few discreet phone calls. The next morning, municipal authorities arrived at the busy junction. Uniformed officers ordered vendors to move. They confiscated trays, tore down makeshift stalls, and pointed to one name in particular on their clipboard: Amira. When Amira arrived minutes later, barefoot and hopeful as always, her spot was gone. The tray her grandmother had made from scraps was gone. Her few roses had scattered on the ground, crushed by boots and tires. Vendors told her a big woman had sent the police. For the first time in weeks, Amira cried, not out of pity, but helplessness. Her grandmother had used the last of their savings the night before. They needed insulin today, and she had nothing. No sales, no tray, just an empty sack clutched to her chest like a shield. She curled behind a cement wall, beside a small shop, trying to breathe through the panic. Jason found her there. He had skipped school, racing to the junction the moment Toby texted that vendors were being cleared. When he saw her, small, hunched, broken in a way she had never looked before, something in him shattered. He knelt beside her, whispered her name. She didn't look up, only said, I couldn't even save the flowers. Jason gently took her hand. It's not your fault. She finally looked at him, and in that silence, all the noise of Lagos faded. Back at the mansion, Vivian sat alone in her pristine walk-in closet, staring at a shoebox buried beneath scarves. Inside was a photograph, faded edges curling. A girl no older than Amira, barefoot, wearing a torn school uniform and balancing a tray of bread on her head. Her own face, 11 years old, hungry, determined. For a moment, Vivian just stared. Then she shoved the box back into the drawer and slammed it shut like a door. She'd sworn never to reopen, but the past didn't stay buried. Later that evening, Naomi, Vivian's younger sister, showed up unannounced, fire in her voice. You sent people after a child, Viv, she demanded. Vivian, icy and defensive, denied it at first. Naomi wasn't fooled. You forgot where you came from. Don't punish that girl for who you used to be. Vivian scoffed, but Naomi wasn't done. You think wearing silk and holding champagne erases the mud from your feet. You can hide that photo, but you can't hide the truth. The words hung in the air long after Naomi left. Vivian sat in her designer kitchen, untouched food on the counter, the city lights outside blinking like a memory she couldn't unsee. At the annual school fundraiser, the gymnasium had been transformed into a gallery, canvas displays, student performances, colorful lights flickering over polished floors. Parents in lace and linen circled the exhibits, sipping punch and making polite conversation. Jason stood near the back, nervous, until the MC announced his name. Our final piece of the evening is by Jason Cole. A spotlight hit his canvas. Gasps rippled through the room. It was Amira, barefoot, holding roses, her face proud, painted in bold, unflinching strokes. Behind her, a blur of traffic and chaos framed her dignity like a halo. Below the image, a handwritten caption read, "The girl who still stands, tall when the world steps on her." The room fell silent. Then came the applause, slow, then rising. Amira, standing near the door in her cleanest dress, was gently ushered forward. Jason smiled at her, and she nodded. When she reached the mic, she pulled out a crumpled piece of brown paper. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I once sold roses just to buy bread. Now I know even thorns can be beautiful." Her short poem flowed soft and strong, and by the end, Half the room had tears in their eyes. Some of the wealthiest women in Lagos dabbed their faces, unsure whether from guilt or admiration. Vivian arrived halfway through the applause, heels clicking as she entered. She froze at the sight. Her son standing beside the very girl she had ridiculed, now radiant in the spotlight. She said nothing during the remaining speeches. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, she approached Amira, her voice low, half apologetic, half defensive. She said, "You did well tonight. Take this, and go back home." She handed her an envelope thick with crisp Naira notes. Amira looked at it for a long moment, then up at Vivian. Her voice was soft, but unwavering. "Respect is free, Ma. You can keep your money." And just like that, she turned and walked away, head high. Vivian stood motionless, stunned not by disrespect, but by the grace she had just witnessed, something money could never buy. That night, back at the mansion, Jason confronted her. "You were that girl once," he said, placing the old photo Naomi had shown him earlier on the kitchen counter. "What happened to you?" Vivian looked at the image, her younger self, the tray of bread, the dusty face, the same defiance Amira carried. Tears welled. "I was tired of being ashamed," she whispered. "Tired of being looked at like I didn't belong. So I buried it, deep." Jason sat across from her, quiet. "You buried yourself," he said. Vivian didn't argue. She cried, not for her past, but for how far she had run from it. Vivian parked her luxury SUV just outside the slum, switching off the ignition with a deep breath. The air was thick with heat, dust, and the buzz of street chatter, a world she hadn't stepped into in decades. Her heels wobbled slightly on the uneven ground as she made her way past rusted rooftops and laundry lines swaying in the breeze. It wasn't the mansion, but it was home for someone she owed an apology, and maybe something more. She found Amira outside, helping her grandmother shell beans in a rusted basin. Both looked up in surprise. Vivian didn't wait for pleasantries. "I came to ask you something," she said plainly. "Come work with me. Help me build something new, a product line based on flowers. Your flowers." Amira blinked, confused, unsure if this was mockery or some test. Vivian continued, softer this time. "You have an eye for beauty, the kind you don't learn in boardrooms. I need that." Amira looked to her grandmother, who, after a long pause, gave a slow, approving nod. "Go," she said gently. "It's your turn to bloom." 3 months later, Amira walked through the glass doors of Col Botanica, not as a vendor, but as a student intern. She wore her ID badge like a medal, soaking in lessons about packaging, fragrance profiles, and branding. Vivian assigned her a mentor, made space for her voice in the boardroom, and listened, truly listened, when Amira suggested using locally sourced petals for the new formula. The result was Rose Bloom, a minimalist, elegant skincare line with Amira's story woven into every label. Billboards across the city showed her standing in a rose field, no longer barefoot, her eyes fierce and full of light. When the product launched, orders flooded in, not just for the lotion, but for what it symbolized, resilience, rebranded as beauty. Jason watched quietly from the back of the event hall as his friends stepped onto the stage, beside his mother. He didn't smile because she was different now. He smiled because she wasn't. The world had just finally caught up. As for Vivian, she stood a little taller too, not out of pride, but humility. She began volunteering at girls' shelters, showing up without cameras or hashtags. In each young face, she saw fragments of herself and of Amira, and began, bit by bit, to remember who she was before the walls and the masks. One morning, Amira walked past the same busy junction that had once been her world, a small piece of asphalt where she fought for dignity, survival, and hope. The city had changed. The junction, once a whirlwind of chaos and fumes, was now cleaned up, calmer. Painted curbs lined the edges. Vendors had designated stalls, tucked slightly further from the road. A soft breeze carried the scent of roasted corn and wet dust. Morning sun streamed across the pavement, bathing it in warm, forgiving light. Amira stood quietly, looking at the spot where her tray used to sit. The wooden slab, the cracked plastic bag holding crumpled naira notes, the bouquet of half-wilted roses, all gone. In her hand, she now held a single rose, fresh, dew-kissed, blooming, wide and proud. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her eyes didn't. She bent down, slowly and reverently, placing the rose on the pavement, exactly where she once stood barefoot, humiliated by the world, unseen by most. Her lips parted in a whisper, but no, words escaped. It wasn't prayer, it wasn't regret. It was something softer, remembrance. She stood again, brushing imaginary dust off her skirt. The sound of tires on gravel reached her ears. A black Range Rover, sleek and polished, pulled to a quiet stop beside her. Unlike that day, the window didn't stay tinted and silent. This time, it rolled down smoothly, revealing Vivian Cole. Vivian wore no sunglasses, no power suit. Her hair was pulled back, clean but simple. There was no armor in her face, just an expression of warmth, tentative but real. "Need a ride, partner?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost unsure. Amira gave her a small smile. The corners of her lips lifted like dawn breaking over the edge of a long, dark night. She opened the door and climbed in, cradling a small bouquet of fresh roses in her lap. Not for sale, not survival, just beauty. In the back seat, Jason sat with a sketchpad open on his knees. He looked up as she entered, offered her that same quiet smile he had given her on the very first day. The day he bought all her roses without asking the price. His pencil danced between his fingers. On the paper, a drawing was taking shape. A girl with wings made of roses, rising into a sky of shifting light. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The car eased back into traffic, gliding like a whisper through the city. The bouquet in Amira's lap tilted as the car turned, and one rose slipped free, tumbling gently onto the floor near Vivian's feet. No one moved to pick it up. It stayed there, a quiet reminder, a small wordless memorial to everything that had changed, and to everything that hadn't. Outside the window, the city moved on. Pedestrians passed. Vendors called out their morning deals. Children in school uniforms chased each other near bus stops. Lagos hummed with its usual intensity. But for a moment, inside that car, time slowed down. Amira looked out the window and saw the junction disappearing behind them. But in her heart, it remained the spot where she had been mocked, ignored, and nearly erased. And yet, it was the same spot where her story truly began, where she was seen, where she was remembered, where she was never the same again. Inside the car, Jason's pencil paused. He turned the sketchpad so Amira could see. The image was almost finished, a figure floating above a cracked street, rose petals bursting from her shoulders like wings, her face tilted toward the light. Amira smiled at the drawing, a single tear catching the edge of her lashes before vanishing into her cheek. Vivian glanced at the rearview mirror. She didn't speak, but her eyes softened. For once, she didn't need control. She didn't need to be perfect. In the back of her mind, she remembered another morning, 30 years ago, when she too had stood barefoot, selling bread outside a motor park, her hands rough with struggle. That memory had haunted her for years. She buried it under success, under perfume and parties and press releases. But today, that memory no longer made her afraid. She looked at Amira and saw not a reflection of her shame, but a reminder of her beginning. "Where to?" she asked softly. "Anywhere," Amira replied. "Forward." The car rolled on. The bouquet remained on the dashboard, bright against the leather, and the fallen rose on the floor, red, vibrant, and unbothered. lay there, quietly, bravely, a single rose where it all began, and this time no one stepped on it. Fade out.